Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the 12-step guided process through the Steps to Freedom workbook. Today, we're going to be looking at step 7 out of the 12 steps, and so we're going to jump into that today. Just a reminder, if you have not seen steps 1 through 6, I would encourage you to pause this video, stop, and go to step 1 and work your way through. The 12 steps are made to be worked from 1 to 12 for a very important reason. Each step builds on the next one, and so yeah, starting partway through wouldn't be an effective way to kind of go through the 12-step process. So please, yeah, if this is your first video that you're watching, welcome, but just maybe go back to step 1, search for that, and then kind of continue your way through. And yeah, all the best to everyone who is on their 12-step journey, working through the workbook. Yeah, my prayers are with you as you go through this really meaningful process. So yeah. The goal of these studies are to demystify each of the steps, each of the 12 steps, one by one, with the goal of removing any barriers that somebody might have when they're actually going through the workbook. I just want to make it as simple as possible so that that's not a challenge. There's enough challenges just in terms of doing the work and, being dedicated to completing the 12-step process because it is lengthy. But I just want to make it as easy as possible by giving some guidance on each step. Again, we use what's called the Steps to Freedom workbook, which is created by Doug Weiss. The book's not perfect, and it doesn't have to be, and there are other books that also lead people through the 12 steps, but this is just the one that we're using at this time. So yeah, I'm going to give you a snapshot today of what step 7 is all about. And if you have the Steps to Freedom workbook, take a look at it while I'm going through this. The goal is to make sure you're familiarized with the material that you'll be asked to kind of complete. So use that in whatever way would be helpful for you. Treat the workbook like a journal and write down everything in it. Don't just use bullet points on everything. Be fulsome with your answers. Write down exactly what comes to your mind and write that all down. So all right, so jumping into step 7. So step 7 says, we humbly asked him, that's God, to remove all of our shortcomings. And a Bible verse that I find that's very helpful to kind of pair with step 7 is 1 John 1:9, which says, if we confess our sins, he is faithful and will forgive us our sins and purify us from all unrighteousness. As a reminder, the word we is used instead of the word I in all of the 12 steps because the 12 steps are meant to be worked in community. They're not meant to be worked in isolation. If we do isolate, it's a very, very good chance that we'll never complete the 12 steps. And even if we do, we actually won't get the most out of it that we could if we had been sharing it with others. So as a very quick recap for step 6, the step that comes directly before this one, we were given the opportunity to evaluate what led to the harms that we have caused to others. An image that I used in my step 6 talk was we're turning over the rocks of our hearts in our garden or in our yard of our life. We're turning over the rocks and we're looking underneath and we're seeing all these ugly little insects that start running away and scurrying away when the light kind of pierces into that dark place. And the whole goal is to kind of watch and inventory where all those little bugs, those character defects in my image, where they run to so that we can find out where's the root of this sin in our life. So you're kind of turning over these rocks, looking for the channels and the paths of kind of just poor lifestyle and poor habits and develop lifestyles that we've kind of created. So we're trying to figure out where those all come from. And we also inventoried what those character defects were. So we're trying to kind of dive deeper into this. And now in step 7, we have the opportunity to deal with these defects of character. If we don't work this step fully, there's actually no reason to believe that we will not return to our addiction again in the very near future. Step 4 or 5, we talked about all the things that we had done wrong, all the harms that we had caused to others. But this is kind of peeling that onion back one more layer and figuring out, okay, why did we do those things? And how can we change our lifestyle, transform our lifestyle in a way that we don't go back to those things again? So we're going to talk about that here. Once we see our defects listed on a page in front of us in the workbook, we are able to honestly evaluate where our lifestyle is taking us and make the changes that are required in order to live a different lifestyle with God's help. It's all through God's help. And the only way to transform our behaviors is by being open to God transforming our souls. Romans 12:2 says, do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. So to transform something means to change its condition, its nature, its function, and its identity. God wants to change more than just our behaviors, just more than just the outward things that we do on any given Tuesday. He wants to change the way that we think on a very core level. Simply changing behaviors is like trimming the weeds in a garden instead of removing them. If we just chop the tops off the dandelions, they're just going to be back within a week or two, right? So in the same way, weeds always grow back unless they are pulled out by the roots. We need to let God transform our minds, but this change takes time. None of the biblical giants that we think of did it overnight. You know, the Moseses and the Josephs and, you know, Jacob and all these people, like none of them just came out of the womb being perfect or having perfect lifestyles. God led each of them on a transformational process over their lifetime in which they grew and established better behaviors and better lifestyles and not just kind of behavior modifications. So yeah. It's a process, and God will walk with us step by step and never give us more than we can bear. Lasting change only comes with his help. So the good news about step 7 is that, you know, while we're kind of we're putting a stake in the ground or a flag in the ground saying, hey, we're going to turn our lives and reorient this way. This is actually just day 1 of a lifetime, you know, change in our lives. So it's not that we have to be perfect right now, but we are committing to God that we're going in a new direction. So step 7 is the start of this new transformational journey that we are on. We share our defects of character with God, with ourselves, and another human being. And then God starts the healing and transforming process in our souls. And I would just say, you know, as I talked about in my step 4 and 5 talk, we do need to be really intentional with the way that we, I guess, talk about these things, in this case, character defects. When we were in step 4 and 5, we were talking about the behaviors that we had done, the people we had harmed, the thoughts we had, the actions we had kind of made. In this case, again, we're just going one level deeper, but we still need to tell people about these root, you know, issues of lifestyle that we have. So if we're prideful, if we're arrogant, if we're critical of others, you know, these are actually like root causes that are, and then the surface behavior is, you know, I said that insulting thing to somebody, right? But the root behind it is an assumption that I know best in all situations, or that person is less intelligent than I am, you know, these kinds of things, right? So this is what we're trying to root out in our lives. So while we may ask God to remove these defects of character in step 7, the process of living a transformed life takes place in every second of every day going forward. God will grant us the power that we need to adopt new lifestyles, but we must continue to live out those changes in order to create new and lasting changes in our life. God never actually removes our free will from us, and so we have to partner with him on this journey of recovery. So again, you know, while we talk about God, we ask him to remove our shortcomings, it's not that he's actually going to just remove our will and our ability to make choices from our life. God will give us I guess you could say, like a softening of the heart. It's like he kind of tills the soil of our heart so that we're now soft and malleable. But if we allow ourselves to be filled with, you know, rocks and all these other things, again, we're going to become hard again, right? So doing the 12 steps and being on step 6 and 7, he's essentially giving us a soft heart, but we have to choose now how we're going to take care of that yard. If we're going to let rocks and insects and all these kind of things come in, and weeds, or if we're going to kind of cultivate that and kind of keep that kind of clean. So yeah, the best way to continue on this journey is through humility. Again, thinking of this kind of day by day, second by second, you know, new lifestyle that we're committing to here. James 4:10 tells us that we must humble ourselves before the Lord, and then he will lift us up. So it's in that state of humility that God actually will continue to lift us up. But we can't kind of elevate ourselves and expect God to just give us lots of compliments or something. Like we need to have a right understanding of who we are and where we're at. Humility doesn't mean that we're weak. In fact, it shows great strength and self-control. But humility is to try and make the right estimate of oneself and to see ourselves as God sees us. Staying humble through this recovery process allows us to be accountable to others and to God, and helps us to keep on a productive path. So again, if we come into this, you know, something like pride is such a deep-seated habitual lifestyle that can really poison us in so many ways, right? So humility, again, kind of fights against that pride, and helps us to stay humble and helps us to stay accountable to others so that God can continue to speak into our life, right? If we just isolate ourselves again, then we'll continue to operate in ways that we have done up until now. So just a summary, the goals of step 7 are, firstly, to be fully willing to let these defects of character go. And the second is to commit to God, to ourselves, and another human being, the way that we want to live in a transformed lifestyle. And thirdly is to live out that transformation lifestyle moment by moment going forward. So we're trying to, again, put a stake in the ground saying, this is a new lifestyle that I want to live. I want to live a transformed life. And we're trusting God that he's going to give us the power to do that. And then we're kind of following that out in faith, knowing that he gives us that strength. So a few little, hopefully helpful things as we go through the workbook. I just have mine right here with me, and I was looking through it earlier, kind of just looking at things that I wanted to kind of point out to people as they're going through this particular step 7. So on page 72 of the Steps to Freedom workbook, around the middle of the page, it asks you to identify all of the character defects that you want God to remove in your life and to kind of work on. And it gives a total of 10 lines of space where you can write those in. Again, if you have more character defects than 10, just find a way to keep writing them. Like, don't be limited by the fact that the book formats 10 options for character defects. Likely most of us have a lot more than 10 character defects inside of us. So again, don't be limited by just the formatting in the book. If it asks you for that, write down everything. Whatever God brings to your mind as a character defect after you went through your step 6, write it down here. So again, just don't be limited by the formatting in that case. On page 73, there's a question that asks about, as we think of step 6, the author, he kind of likens this step to like a surgery occurring. We have like a cancer inside of us, and God is going to do a surgical procedure. And we're kind of, he's asking us to determine what are some of the experiences that we are anticipating will happen after this surgery. So I just kind of wanted to read my answer to you because I found this question a little bit perhaps misleading, not in a hugely problematic sense, but I just had maybe a different perspective than what the author did. And I just wanted to share what I wrote down here, just so you can think about in your life kind of what you see this process looking like. So he said, yeah, what are some of the experiences you are anticipating will happen? I said, I'm not anticipating a surgery in a traditional sense where it's kind of removed and then life is good and that doesn't return. I said, I don't anticipate a surgery, but instead a slow chemo treatment similar to a marathon. I also would expect a void because something's been removed from me, right? Something has been removed from my soul in terms of these character defects. And so this void, I must choose to fill with other things. This removed defect, I have to fill it with new things that will actually take up that void space. And also I expect a painful and challenging process of discovery and healing, right? So I guess in my sense, I kind of view this step 7, again, we're initiating this new journey, this new transformed lifestyle, but it's actually not going to be cured, the day after we pray to God and ask him to remove these things. It will be a journey going forward that we have to choose to adopt. Otherwise, it'll come right back. So again, I kind of see it maybe a little bit more long-term, but you can write down whatever kind of answer comes to your mind when you see that question. So turning to page 74, it asks you at the bottom of the page to write out a prayer or prayers to God to remove one character defect at a time. And he encourages not to clump all the defects together. And I understand the reasoning why he says that, because I do think that whatever process we go through with this, we need to acknowledge one by one each character defect and pray to God about them. I would just suggest that perhaps, for instance, on the book, they only give you a very small amount of space. And I could imagine taking up 6 or 8 pages of prayers. If I truly wrote out a prayer in the way that I would say it to God, it would just take a huge amount of space. So obviously you could use separate paper, and I would encourage you to do that if you If you are someone that is, enjoys journaling, for instance, like definitely do write down in full your prayers, asking God to remove each and every one of them, and kind of talking about, how you feel about each of them. However, I did end up kind of clumping them together, but I prayed to God individually about each one, specifically, not just like, oh God, remove my envy, remove my anger. Like I didn't just list them and then kind of do a wrap up prayer. I prayed individually over each one. So I did write a clumped prayer, but I named each and every one of them in it. And again, it was in the context of I had also prayed separately, asking him to remove each one. So the goal, again, is to take each character defect seriously, and to address that in whatever way is most appropriate for you. So make sure you do address each one. But whether you have to write it out in that space provided, or doing it in an extended time of prayer, I think that personally is optional in my opinion, but that's up to you as well. So, and finally on page 75, it asks you to list out the defects that you identified. Again, these are in your step 6 work, so you can just literally copy these over from step 6. But it basically asks you to list them and write down when you prayed over them. And then it also says to write down your 1-year progress note as to how you're feeling now in relation to each of those. What has God done in your life in terms of removing those things, or changing, again, your lifestyle so that those are not as big a part of your life. I actually just went in and did my year review because it's been just over a year since I did my last steps to freedom exercise. And it was interesting to kind of go through and see where I'm at in each of those kind of areas. And I definitely have seen progress across the board in each and every area that I wrote down. So I do really appreciate that. But one thing I was going to say is that list that you write down on page 75, you can use that as your kind of blueprint for when you're writing out your prayers, if you are writing them out or praying to God about them, either way. So it's just a little bit of advice that I thought might be helpful, looking back at my work, questions that might be confusing or things that might just need a little bit of clarity. So that's pretty much going to wrap up our time together. Again, I really encourage you to keep working at the 12 steps. Don't get stuck. The biggest issue with the 12 steps is that there's, a lot of work involved with each of this. It's easy to be, over, I guess, feel like you need to do a perfect set of steps, and it's easy to do like a half-hearted set of steps, right? We kind of want to be right in that middle where we do ask God to write down or to tell us everything that we have in terms of, say, character defects in relation to this step, and then to write all those things down to the best of our ability where we're not holding anything back. But then the goal is to kind of just keep moving forward and not just sit on that step worrying that God might bring something to your mind later. That's okay if he does, and you can address that later. It's not that you just do the steps once necessarily and you can never touch it again or never think about these topics again. So yeah, again, set yourself like a timeline in which you're going to do step 7 and do all the work and then move on to step 8, right? And just keep moving. Don't get stuck. Because the devil wants nothing more than to find some reason, again, either being too picky or too shallow. He'll find any way he can to try and like derail you from your 12-step journey. Again, don't get stuck up in a format. I mentioned at least one thing in this step work today that talked about, formatting maybe being a bit of a limitation. So don't get hung up on formatting if it doesn't kind of fit what you need to write down. Write down whatever you need to write down. Again, I strongly encourage that you share each and every step that you do, all the work that you do with a sponsor person, someone who can hear the work that you're doing and can encourage you on this journey. Don't share every single step because that would take way too long, but just share the top 5 to 7 questions that kind of really jumped out at you, and share those with another person. So yeah, I'll end that. I will end that there. But yeah, I just commend you in your work on step 7, whatever place you're at, or how that journey is going for you. I just pray that would be that this would be an encouraging step, and that you would feel that there's a bit of a landmark moment where you're turning and reorienting your life in a new direction through this step. So yeah, have a great day wherever you are, whatever kind of time zone you're in. And we will be seeing each other for step 8 in about a month. So take care, and all the best.